Okay, good morning. Chochma and Beis, volume 2. We are middle of page 1198. And we're discussing Re'iyah, perception. We'll call it cognitive vision. I just coined that yesterday when I was thinking about it, where you don't see it with your physical eyes, but you see it with the eyes of your mind. In other words, it's a profound clarity, what he called behirus, a clarity, a resonance in the mind as if you see it. That in the levels, even the higher levels of the divine, that are not perceived through existence. Ein Sof itself, like he says, mitzaratzma, and also that which is l'mayla megeder elemus, higher than existence, that we don't just understand it or listen to it from a distance, we actually can have a type of sensory visual experience, but with the mind, like he said clearly, not basar, not ein riya gashmis, ki'im, like the Raya Mehemna says, haseichel de beliba be'ayin haseichel, or the expression in the pasuk is chacham einov bereishei. The wise person is, his eyes are in his head. So real seeing is more than just seeing with your eyes. Actually, you can see something with your physical eyes, and a wise person will see something more than we see, than a regular person sees. And he brought the Tanya. The Tanya, by the way, is Perek Chav Tes, chapter 29, where he also says, Lohoyer eino b'riyah chushis, v'lo b'chinas shmiya v'havana levad. An actual, tangible seeing, not just listening and understanding alone. So here we see Riyah in the level of Yediyah. And though this is Yediyah, like he says right after, this is Chochmah versus Binah. Binah is Shmiya, listening, is like listening. And Chochmah is like seeing. So he says, well, before he qualifies, rather, let me start. First he says it's Chochmah and Binah and gives the example of the person who conceives of an idea, as opposed to the one who hears it from him. Or right afterwards, he gives the example of that same person when he conceives it, and after time, as time passes, it doesn't quite have that same clarity. So he says that's the difference between the Riyah that we're talking about and Shmiya. So both are Haskalah, both are in the level of, both are on the level of Yediyah, of knowledge, cognitive skill, cognitive faculty rather, but it's a difference of how the extent of the clarity one reaches. Okay. Now, though, like he says, the ima yesh is a Yediyah sichlis, even though Chochmah too, we're not talking about now that physical sight that comes with physical vision. It's a Yediyah sichlis. It's a perception and awareness on a cognitive level, except that clarity. B'kol mokem, nevertheless, it's more than just seichel. L'mayla mesichli mamish. It's higher than seichel mamish. And the Rebbe Rashab, in the parentheses, which we elaborated upon yesterday at length, he said, "Hainu levad hanocha sichlis." In addition to that, besides the hanocha sichlis, which I called the settling, the resonance, the fact, knowing, but not fully being able to express it. He says, besides that, there's also another thing, that a person, that the words he used is, the gamma sichli, even the sichli part of this, not just the hanocha sichlis, it's not just biyadiyah shebeseichel, like I said, the technical knowing about it, but the seichel is grasp something that's somewhat above actual understanding it in detail. Like when you sense something, as when you hear something that sounds right, but you can't quite fully put your explain it explain in details. So by the way, I was looking up before talking about earlier in Ayin Beis. I wanted to see how the Frierdiker Rebbe in Tofresh Pei Beis. You remember I mentioned that the Frierdiker Rebbe elaborates on this section. Maybe it'd be worthwhile to learn it after we finish this piece in Ayin Beis, to learn how the Frierdiker Rebbe, because he embellishes on it quite a lot. Well, I say quite, but pretty solidly that can help us in this understanding. So I just looked at this section about this parentheses. I wanted to see what he writes, how he presents it. So I'll just tell you what he says. I'm reading the Frierdiker Rebbe's version, using, obviously, it's the language of Ayin Beis with a little. So it's interesting, he doesn't even mention Hanochas Sichlis. He only mentions the second half. But here's what he says.
Beis.
Tafresh Pei Beis. And I already discussed it. I actually read pieces from it, if you remember, a few classes back. So it shouldn't be new. So he says the following. Did we even, I may have even posted images of it. I don't remember now. Okay. I'm just going to read a few lines, this past section. He says like this. Firstly, by the piece where he says that the person who conceives of the idea, so the Frierdiker Rebbe adds in the Yiddish, in the parentheses, the Klarkeit von dem Inyan is by him ki'ilu roye be'einav mamish. So the clarity of the idea is by him as if he sees it with his eyes. So the word clarity is what I've been using. He actually says Klarkeit. Good. It's one thing. Then the person who listens, on the other hand, who hears about it, even though it's the same idea, but does not resonate quite the same with the same clarity as by the one who conceived the idea. Fine. Then I want to move down. Okay. This is where we just read. I'm going to read it now. I'm reading Tafresh Pei Beis. The mimer is called Ish Kisishta. Page 322 if you have the Sefer, but I'm reading like this. He says like this. So we're not talking about something that is like you're having some premonition or some vision in prophecy. It's yediyah. We're talking about a seichel cognitive process. You're knowing an idea. There's nothing that's unique. In other words, it's not outside of the realm of yediyah. It's yediyah mamish. Umekol mokim hare'en ze yediyah sichlis belvad. At the same time, it's not just the intellectual component of knowledge. Frierdiker Rebbe adds now. This means that the idea is not limited. It's not limited only as something that we know. Remember, I mentioned knowledge has two parts. You know facts, you know data, but there's also sensing a truth, a resonance, something greater than yourself. So yediyah is not just knowledge. It's not just knowing things. And I'm not talking about das now. When I say yediyah, I mean in general, all the cognitive faculties here. So he says, it also has something that it senses that higher than just knowing the technical information about something. So he says like this, the person who really knows the idea, like in this case, the conceiver of the idea, it's not a knowledge that's just about the parameters of the intelligence of the intelligent idea and its parameters and its structure. Or you could say, and its definitions. Ktsovis really usually means the edges, the parameters, and Agbalosa would be the definitions. In other words, so it's not just about, like, let's say 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, so there's a statement, there's an equation there. 2 + 2 = 4. If you want to elaborate more, you can go into more details about it. So every idea has its parameters and structure. We're going to discuss, I'm going to explain the idea of, what is a molecule? So there's a bunch of information. You find out what's a molecule. But he says, Ki'im, there's something more. It's Ki'im, K'moisha Seichel Tefes HaSa'ir, K'moisha Hulamayla Masaga V'Yadiyah. That it's the Seichel is grasping the Oir, the energy of the idea, the concept. That's more than just the sum of the parts of the details of the data. And this is what I mentioned, that when two people can look at the same data, and one person will see something much more than the other. Because one knows the facts, they know the data, they have the information. They don't know the spirit of it, so to speak. Just like you can read a page and get the ideas, and someone else reads it and they understand it on a whole different level, because you're grasping more the oir that's within it. Let's say the author is trying to convey a sentiment. So he's conveying it through a series of phrases and sentences and phrases and paragraphs. So you can know what he said, but there's knowing and there's knowing. And then you could say, 1 second, there's a lot more here going on than just the story is telling us. So that's a type of thing. The Ma'ila Masor we did. V'zehu behirus ha'oir ta'askola ma'sha'seichel tefes be'etzem ha'inyan shel ha'ma'ila ma'aseichel. This is the clarity of the energy, the oir in the idea, how seichel is grasping something that's somewhat higher than pure seichel, again, the structure of the seichel. It's similar to use a simple example of el kolona, the synergy, when you say the word bracha, Beis reish chof hey. So a child who doesn't know how to read yet and doesn't understand words sees 4 letters, but they know letters. Beis reish chof hey. They know the Hebrew letters. So you can know the letters, you can even pronounce it right. You can even know its basic meaning even, but someone knows what a bracha is. The true meaning of a bracha is more than just a combination of 4 letters. Because you could take Beis Reish Chof Hey, combine them differently, and they have something else. My point is, there's something that you grasp that's more than the sum of the parts. The same thing is with the components and the elements of intelligence. That there's the intelligent structure, there's the structural expression of it. Just like right now, when you hear someone speaking, you hear someone teaching. So you, of course, you can pick up and understand the technical aspects of what being said, but then there's a point where but then there's another element that you may not even pick up all the details, but you sense something that is more than just the technicality and the mechanics of the idea. Okay, so now I did not yet have a chance to.
Do you hear me?
I heard what you said, but I'm ignoring you because we have a rule now.
Okay, just the word re'iyah, inayna seichel. Yeah, but you said. Okay, I heard you.
So now I didn't have a chance to really look earlier. Maybe some of you did, about how the Rebbe Rashab explains Hanochas Seichel. I think I said yesterday it was what chapters did I say? Chav Tes? No. Yeah, chapters. I just wanted to see one thing, maybe, and I won't spend a lot of time on it. I'll just look. Oh yeah, okay. Chapters 39. Chapters 39 and on. When a person has a havraka, like the spark of an idea, like a lightning bolt, a flash of an idea, that's what we call Barak HaMavrik, which is associated with Chochmah. I want to explain now how this is connected to Chochmah, not Binah. And I think I also want to correct something I may have said yesterday that was a little different than I intended to say. So when you say Chochmah, what happens? When you have a flash of an idea, I'll just make it even easier to understand. Let's say you're struggling with a problem. It could be a problem at work, problem in your own life, a dilemma, and you really don't have an answer. Then something happens, and suddenly a flash of an idea of perhaps there's a solution. There's a certain deep geschmack, obviously, a deep pleasure, especially if this spark of an idea will ultimately materialize. But sometimes you say, I got it. I think I have the answer. I'm only saying I think. Let's say I have the answer. Now, you don't have it developed. You have no strategy. It's not fleshed out. But there's a spark, which in echus, in quality, it has such a powerful resonating truth, though it's not developed. You can't turn it into anything. Just like somebody may have a new business idea. They see a problem and they say, I have an idea. I'm going to build an airplane, which will, the first moments of great ideas, or not even great ideas, any idea. So the first moment, there's something about that lightning bolt of the spark that though it doesn't have the full body of a fleshed out idea, and it's definitely not a business plan yet, and you don't know how you're going to do it, but you have in that spark something, some solution. That is what he says back, if I recall correctly, in chapters, especially chapters 41 and 42, back in volume 1, pages 70, 71. He says that's why Chochmah is not just a point that Binah fleshes out. It's not just a matter of Gilead Helam, that Chochmah is actually the level of Ayin and Binah is the level of Yesh. That's how far apart they are. So there's an element where this spark of an idea, now you come and you present it, and let's say you give it to your second in command or someone who's very good at fleshing out an idea, and they turn it into a brilliant strategy and a brilliant plan with all its details. But so it's not just that Chochmah is the beginning of Binah, but Chochmah has something that only the conceiver of the idea had that full clarity, which is we're going to learn a little later, is that's why then when you go off into the details of the idea, like I said before, the mechanics, the ktsovis of Seichel and Hagbalosa, its parameters, its mechanics, its technicalities, you can sometimes lose sight of that clarity. How many times has it happened that a person, an idea, then you start discussing it, and then people say, 1 second, I think we've wandered off the reservation here. It's not what we first intended. And no one even remembers what was first said. That's why I always tell people, you have an idea, write it down immediately. Because later, once you're going to get into the thicket of the wilderness of details, and how many different ways and how many different details, you may forget that point, and you need it as a point of reference. Because without it, you don't have a reality check. So that Chochmah, as much as it is only an initial spark, many ways is that reality check, and like to make sure you're on track, that all the details are aligned with that nekuda, with that key point. And you see this all the time. You can take an idea, you start discussing it, you start arguing about it, and if you have no breaks and no parameters and no boundaries and structures, what's going to happen is you're going to go everywhere. And at a point you could be off, so far off from the original point, and it's, yeah, beautiful ideas, but you forgot what the point of departure was. So what I'm saying is that I'm trying to, based on my recollection, he says, Nekudas HaSkola, let me just see the words I wanted to quote here. The Chochmah be'etzem madregasa l'mayla mebina. The Binah tefeses rak b'chinas hametzias delakus, the Chochmah tefeses b'chinas hamahus. So this isn't just Chochmah is one point and Binah is many details. It's fundamentally, qualitatively, Chochmah senses something more. So that's why, actually, to go a step further, that's why it's actually a spark. Because if it was a full-blown entity, it would be too much of its own mitzias. It needs to have the bittul of the spark. Like you almost say, where did that come from? Koyach ma is Chochmah. The letters koyach ma. In chapter 35, in Tanya, in the Haggadah, he says that Shemaiti Memori, the Alter Rebbe says, I heard from my teacher, the Maggid, that in Chochmah dwells hu levade ve'ein zolose, the sense that God, only God and nothing else. Why is that the case? Chochmah is intelligence. Because Chochmah is the bridge. Chochmah is the bridge between intelligence and that which is beyond. As I said yesterday, and I say again, that it's more wisdom and intelligence isn't just about knowing things. It's not just about facts and data. It's learning to experience and experience and perceive a reality greater than yourself. Binah is consumed with the idea. And Chochmah, because it's a spark, why is it a spark? Because it's facing, it's a high keser, the superconscious. So therefore, Chochmah has the bittul that Binah will never have, because of its element of being a qualitatively. So there he discusses in chapters 41 and 42, is Chochmah seichel or not seichel? And end of the day, it's the part of it is seichel, and there's a part of it that's that's bittul, that's very much about what he calls later the inyan sichli. He says, hanocha benefesh, alegi nefesh was leksich de zachazeh, that there's a sense that this is the truth of something, even though you may not have all the bina words for it. And then he goes on to speak about riyah. Yeah. The riyah is even higher. That the riyah of Chochmah is even higher, where riyah is like you're actually experiencing it once. It's not physical, but it's as if you see it. That's how clear it is by you.
What is the translation of leaked? Leaked in Yiddish?
One second. We decided, let me finish. I will pause and I will allow everybody to comment. Let's go with that structure.
Just a translation question.
Well, let's stick with that because everyone's going to start asking translation questions, and we're going to lose this side of this. So the point being like this is this, that I will learn it more in depth. I didn't have complete time to do that, but I will. And there's also the Pei Beis that I just read, Tofresh Pei Beis, and we'll get more to the bottom, but I just wanted to sum up. Now, yesterday the question was asked about what I said was das. What we're talking about here is the beginning of the process, Chochmah, not the end of the process. There's a whole other state where after Binah, you come to a point where you internalize the idea so much, it comes after the detailed understanding, and there becomes a resonance that follows the idea, meaning it becomes internalized, hakara, hargosha. I referred you to the page where he discusses that at length, via daita hayem, where it actually is ready to become a midah, even, a feeling. It becomes so personalized, relevant to you. At this point, we're not talking about the you, the person. This is all about a clarity of a thing that's higher. It's about how clear is this idea in the individual. And we're talking also at the early stages of the process, before it's become structured, like touching the very core essence of the idea. So what he says is Chochmah, as opposed to Binah, is Riyah, opposed to Shmiyah. And said there's a certain element that's Lamayla Mesichli Mamish. As I said, the Friedrich Rebbe does not bring Hanocha Sichlis for whatever reason. He only brings the second half of the parentheses, but that's where we stopped at the end of the parentheses. So I just wanted to add that. Yesterday, when I explained Hanocha Sichlis, I think I did say, it sounded like, at least to myself when I recollect what I said, that there's first you understand something, and then it settles in, becomes a fact by you. That's more similar to das. I think when he says Hanocha Sichlis here, he means more the Hanocha Sichlis that you sense right at the outset a certain truth, that an upleg. But I can't say for sure this is the case because I want to see if he ever compares Hanocha Sichlis, first of all, to das, and how he explains the Hanocha Sichlis in the context of what I just said now. So the jury is still out on that. Just wanted to make sure that it's not yet definitive completely. Maybe also things will get clearer as we learn on here. Okay. Now with that, I'm happy.
Like you said just now about the Hanocha Sichlis, I'm not, like you said, you're also not sure.
Did you look in any mimer before? But
I hear what you said now. I hear what you said now.
No. Forget about what I said. Did you look in any of the mimerim?
About Hanocha Sichlis, no.
Well, I would suggest to look because that's going to be the key. Because I said based on my memory and based on my understanding.
Because he said here, Levada Hanocha Sichlis, Hine Gama Sichli Einoi Rak B'Fnina Sichli.
I explained that already.
Did you see that?
Hanocha Sichlis is not Seichel. Hanocha Sichlis is a resonating truth of the Seichel. Here he says that in the Seichel, there's an element in Seichel itself where you sense a clarity that's not purely just the idea, it's what's the spirit of the idea, so to speak, the Eir HaSeichel. Anyway.
Did you see the picture I posted from the beginning of Ayin Beis?
I saw it, but when, now or yesterday?
Yesterday.
I
That-
saw it, but I didn't not-
Hanacha is the Chochmah.
well, we know that. That's what it says here
Yeah.
too. Yeah, I did not read it. Is there something there you want to say? Share?
No, okay, no, whatever. Just it's similar to what you were saying now. Anyways.
Oh yeah, okay.
I just had a question in Yiddish. What does it mean, leak? The Frierdiker word says "aman leaked," and I don't understand that word in Yiddish.
Licht?
Yes, I think that's what you read.
Up leg?
I mean, it was upleg.
Upleg. Upleg means hanocha. It means a certain resonating, like, you just sense the right, that's correct. Upleg is the Yiddish for hanocha.
Okay. It doesn't get us further though, right?
It does if you know Yiddish, but if you don't know
Settled
Yiddish,
down in your mind. It's settled down.
Okay.
yeah, but the settled can be here, as I said, it could be more of a resonance in the initial stages. I'm just looking.
Leg means to put. It's like to set in place. Sort of like set in your mind.
Yeah, I explained that yesterday. Yeah. The
Simon,
truth is,
I mentioned that before. It's interesting, the expression le'iyas ein haseichel. It doesn't say havanas. It said le'iyas. But ein is like you
isn't that what
explained
we've
it.
been discussing?
Like you explained it. It's a re'iyah.
Yeah. I don't see it in the Frierdiker. I said in the Frierdiker Rebbe.
But these words,
You
Well,
just
the
read
upleg-
something upleg.
That was from the first volume in Ayin Beis, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was the first volume of Ayin Beis. Yeah, there he uses that. Let me see. Let me check. Okay. Anybody? Any other comments? Or we want to move on?
I just that when
Aleg nefesh b'zem leitzich d'zach hazeh.
Like
It's in the
knowing
beginning of
so-
chapter. Yeah, beginning of chapter 42 in Ayin Beis, volume 1, bottom of page 71. Yes.
when Alexander the Great came to the Chachamim, they asked him, "What does it mean a Chacham?" And they told him haroeh as a neirad is the inception of the idea, not the understanding of haroeh, the inception of the idea, where it first comes in, where the person sees it in its mamish, in its essence, in its core. Sounds like the same idea we're talking about here.
I don't know if that helps or makes it more confusing.
I was hoping it would help because it means that when you ro'eh, it's that first mamish idea when it comes to the person. It's mamish itself.
That's your explanation. Roya Sanel, it usually means that a wise person sees the implications of something.
Yeah,
In other words, we see the moment, and a wise person sees the birth, what it will give birth to. So I wouldn't go there right now because it's just going to confuse matters. The Tzemach Tzedek does bring it in his mimer, but in a little different context. So let's stick where we are.
Okay.
So let's continue then. Now, why it's so vital to understand this is because the Rebbe Rashab is relying that we learned it and we know it already, because he's not elaborating much more. He just said Anocha Sichlis, that's it. That's why I wanted to look at those chapters I just referred to.
I was thinking like knowing something intuitively. You don't
That's
have
what yesterday somebody used the word intuition. The question is, what does intuition mean? I didn't want to use intuition because we can now get into an argument for an hour. What does intuition mean? Some people say intuition has nothing to do with seichel altogether. It's like, they say women's intuition or someone intuitively. Is it even seichel? That's why I didn't want to bring it into this discussion. If you're talking intuition, like a smart person who understands, let's say, a subject matter and he intuits because he knows this matter well, it's one thing. But there are people who have intuition about something that has nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with they just sense something, Is it seichel or not? So that's why I didn't want to bring intuition. And it's a debate of its own where intuition fits according to Chassidus, meaning what's the Hebrew word for intuition exactly in the spheres. That's why I didn't want to go there. Let me just say something. Look, I'm not here to toot my horn, but I did learn a little Chassidus. And I'm trying to be the best to try to explain these ideas. I'm more than open, that's why we stop, and I'm happy to hear things. But when I sometimes say, let's not bring that into it, it's not because I'm being stubborn and I don't want to just talk about something else. Because based on my own experience or learning in the past, I know it's going to confuse matters. So to me, right now, this is challenging enough. Right now, we're trying to let's keep the Nekudas HaChochmah in mind here. The Nekudas HaChochmah, if you want to understand what we're going to learn in these pages, I strongly, strongly suggest you try to stop processing and only absorb. Turn yourself into a 5-year-old child, just like I'm doing. And Chumash Mikra, we're reading the Rebbe speaking, so he's saying a mimer, and you have no ability to stop him. You have no ability to ask him to explain. He's going to say what he has to say. The only thing you have the ability to do is to listen and absorb. That's how you'll understand this. I find whenever I try to understand too much before the subject is over, I get more confused. And then when I see what he says afterwards, then I have to go back and say, 1 second, I didn't understand it right in the first place. So it's something that requires training and patience. We're literally in the middle of a subject here. I'm not saying this, by the way, this isn't Musar or reprimand. I'm not saying anyone did it. I'm just seeing for myself that you have to really be very, very ultra focused. What exactly does he want to say? And what is he bringing? What is he not bringing? That's why I wonder why the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't bring Anochas Sichlis. There must be a reason. He didn't just forget it. There must be a reason that he didn't bring it, either because he felt it may be too distracting and it's another subject. Whatever the reason is, I'm not sure. But so right now, the Nekudas HaChochmah that we're learning now, before the Binah, is this. He wants to us. How do we come to Riyah with the mind? How can the mind come to a understanding something with a resonating truth that's more than just intellect? So like I said, there are many people who understand something, but they don't really get it. And there's some people who get it and don't necessarily understand it that well. Getting it is a key element here. That's why he uses the word Lamaila Mesichli Mamish. That's the word is used. What means Lamaila Mesichli? We're not talking about Amunah, because that's not Lamaila Mesichli Mamish. That's Lamaila Mesichli, period. We're not talking about Seichel Mamish. So what's this Lamaila Mesichli? That's why I think the vital component here is because he wants to show us that there's Riyah in Yediyah, not Riyah through a Munah or through a vision or a dream, and definitely not Riyah Basar, which we already discussed, Sumar and Menechem, which is through the physical reality, the empirical reality. So that's where we are right now. You're going to see this is not, next piece is going to be pretty dense. He's going to be speaking how Chochma and Binah communicate with each other now. So I think we have enough here. Now, if you don't understand this point that we're saying right now, I'm happy to explain it, but what we need to understand, above all, what is this Riyah of Chochma? So he used Anochas Sichlis, he used the word, the language, the Behirus of the Oyer HaSeichel. I'm just looking at the actual Lashon. Where is it? The Behirus. Einerak is Sichli Levad, Yedes Einerak B'Yedes. Leirak B'Yedes Shebesechel Ki Masha Seichel Tefes Kameshu Adayin L'Mayla Miyediyas Sichlis Mamish. And this, for the record, is an addition that the Rebbe Rashab added that Tzemach Tzedek does not have that parentheses. Tzemach Tzedek just says the words, that Tzemach Tzedek says these words, that Chochma and Binah is Riyah and Shmiyah, and he gives the example of the person who conceives of the idea and the one that listens to the idea, or the person who conceived it and later in time, as it becomes more level of Shmiyah. And now we continue learning where from here. Again, if somebody wants to discuss this point, I'm happy to, because that's the point of this whole discussion. Now, it's not over yet, but that's where we are right now. Okay? Anybody want to comment or ask anything? Fine. So back to intuition, I'd be careful now with intuition because we first would have to understand what intuition means. It's possible that yes, that the person who conceived of the idea has an element of an intuitive element to it, which would be considered like a sensing the truth of something. Maybe that's hanocha sichlis, possible. Maybe that's the behirus of sensing the oyer, possible, but I'm not sure because intuition I know has also other meanings. Some people actually think intuition is an emotional thing. It's like you just feel this person is a problem. You have no proof, no way of knowing. You just feel. It's like feeling the vibe. Okay. The line begins L'mayla miyadia sichlis mamish. Okay, the end of the parentheses. V'hinei b'sefer Yetzirah Isa. Friedrich Rebbe, by the way, starts a new paragraph here. Says Ubir Dover Zeh. To explain this, we go to Sefer Yetzirah. I think we should learn to play Beis. It's going to be helpful. We'll do it afterwards. V'hinei b'sefer Yetzirah. You're familiar with the Sefer Yetzirah, is attributed to Avram Avinu. It's considered the first work of Kabbalah. Well, some say Reziel HaMalach from the Adam Harishon is earlier, but that's not. It's shrouded in some mysteries. But Akapam Sefer Yetzirah is quoted quite often in Chassidus. It's Esa Sfiras Blima. So there's an expression now, Sefer Yetzirah, that he's going to cite now. Isa, Haven b'chochmah v'chochem b'bina. That in addition to the fact that there's Chochmah and Binah, there's a level of Binah within Chochmah, Haven b'chochmah, the level of understanding of Binah within Chochmah, and there's the Chochem within Binah, the Chochmah within Binah. So there's a scholarless now. So for all practical purposes, we've said Chochmah is Riyah and Binah is Shmiyah. We explained that we're not talking about physical sight and physical sound. We're talking about levels of perception. If you perceive in the level of Shmiyah, it's more from a distance and not so resonating and not so clear. You heard about it. Seeing is like seeing something close up. So in the context of intellectual close up would be a deep clarity, like the person who conceives the idea versus the person who hears about the idea. Okay. So now he says there's a Chochmah and Binah and Chochmah and Binah. Pirush, Havein b'Chochmah means Shagam b'Chochmah, that also in Chochmah ye is skalulus habina. That also in Chochmah should be encompassing an interconnectivity with Binah. Or rather, skalulus habina, that in it should also be encompassed Binah. And what's v'Chochem b'Binah, the second half of the phrase? The gam acher shenim shecha Binah, that also after Binah was transmitted, after Binah was manifest, liyas b'bchinas pasav b'fnei atzma, being a separate structure, meaning Binah has now Chochmah, the nekuda of Chochmah has moved into the expansion of Binah. It's become its own separate structure. Im kol zeh, it shouldn't be removed from Chochmah. Chochmah mislabeshes ba. So you could say, you know what? Here's Chochmah. Chochmah has now moved to Binah. Binah is now a separate entity, and that's it. No, says the Sefer Yetzirah that just like there's a Binah within Chochmah, the Chochmah needs to be included and manifest and dressed and clothed within Binah. There's a Chochmah that encloses itself in Binah. Now, of course, he did not discuss, so far did not say what that means. Just stated as a fact. In other words, there's a Shmiyah within Riyah, and there's a Riyah within Shmiyah, of another way of putting it. The Nimtza, so what do we conclude? What do we derive from this? Shein klulim zeh b'zeh, that they are interwoven with each other, interwoven or intertwined with each other. The b'chochmah yesh iskalus habina. In Chochmah you have they're being encompassed, iskalus, it's being inside is encompassed Binah. V'chein b'Binah yesh islapshus haChochmah. Doesn't say iskalus, it says islapshus. That also in Binah you have the manifestation or the enclothing of Chochmah also dresses up into Binah. So they're not mutually exclusive two steps in the cognitive process. They interact with each other and are interwoven with each other, each one even in their own place. But what does this mean? So all this is the Tzemach Tzedek, literally word for word from the Tzemach Tzedek with very few changes. The Yuvan Zeh will understand this is scholarless, this interconnectivity, al derech mashal, ba'adam, al derech mashal with an example, ba'adam, in a human being. So he's going to use a human example. Similar to before, he used the example of the human being, someone who conceives of an idea and who hears of the idea, or later in time of the person who conceives, when he conceives and later as time passes. Example, by a human being we see that the level of wisdom of Chochmah, when it gets revealed in his mind, an idea, a conception, like I said before, a flash of an idea. So, so what is the process? He says, a person is maskil adam be'ezah scholar. He's thinking of, he's concentrating on and conceiving, thinking about some haskalah, some idea. V'nefalei haskalah v'hamtzah chadosha. So while he's thinking of this idea, like I mentioned before, it could be a dilemma, or it could just be you're thinking about a certain idea, trying to understand with your mind. Or the truth is, I don't know about, it's not thinking, elaborating, but it's a chochmah, okay. And then a flash of an idea, of a new idea, a scholar of hamtzah chadosha, a new idea, a new hamtzah. A new idea comes up. And at that moment, however, vihi oz b'nefilosam imkeda. It's a very interesting expression. As it falls from its source. Because as I said earlier, it's like, where did that come from? Where does the idea come from? It feels like a flash that fell from somewhere. She says, at that moment, when the new idea flashes in your mind, as it falls, it's still above understanding it. It's just an idea. It's a flash. Hasoga would be comprehension. If someone stopped you at that point, if you froze time at that moment, when the idea entered into you, before you began to think about it, just the moment that you have the flash, he says it's a dayin l'mayla mahasaga. It's still above, before, and precede comprehension. V'hainu, what does that mean? That means shadayin einu yochel lahasbir. He still cannot explain, ulavayir and elaborate. Uvayir Esa, Klal, Luzulose, he cannot at all explain or elaborate on it to another, the Gamla Atzme, and also to himself. So at this point, it's not a comprehensible concept yet. It's an idea. It's a flash of, a spark of a flash. So what do we have at this point? On one hand, you can't say nothing happened. An idea definitely came, hamtzah, like a flashbulb. On the other hand, you can't explain it yet. So what is it? He says, Ella hasbarav haseichel ahu adayin b'chinas keyach hiyuli. To say it's completely not seichel, we're not talking about something that is based on not seichel. We're talking about a concept, an idea. And this idea, when it will be, and should it be fleshed out, can be a whole full, could be an entire book. It could be an entire project. Just one spark can turn into a whole thing. So how do we explain the state that it's in? So he says, he's using now the koyach hiyuli. Yeah. It's in a state, he says, hu adayin ub'chinas koyach hiyuli. Okay. Now, we explained, I've discussed koyach hiyuli a number of times. Not an easy thing to explain exactly, because koyach hiyuli is not quite like koyach and poil. Koyach and poil would mean I have my hand right now, the capacity to write. But either the koyach means it's still only in a potential state. I'm not talking about koyach Ein Sof. We spoke about the power of Ein Sof. I'm talking about potential. Poyol is when I actually start writing. I have the power to throw a stone. And then I throw the stone, koyach and poyol. Hiyuli is a step behind koyach. It's not even a potential that's close to the actual. It's a type of archetypal potential. So it's a word used primarily, the Mittler Rebbe introduced it. I believe it says in some places that before the Mittler, the Alter Rebbe didn't use the word hiyuli. It's a word used a lot in the Chokrim, like the Rambam and the Rasag, Munas Videis, the Rapsad Yugon, and others. It's a used word that is very much associated with a certain Greek word of essentially, it's like somewhat like the Platonic archetypes. Hiyuli. They use it primarily, the Ramban uses it in the beginning of Bereshis when he talks about the Dal Yisodis. So we talk about the four elements: fire, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer. Fire, air, water, and earth. So when you say the Eish HaYisodi, the way that was understood and based on Medrash and so on, that Eish is fire, but there's a place where fire originates. Alter Rebbe cites it in Tanya chapter 19 as well. And it's not, and where fire originates is from an archetype called fire. It's not actual fire. It's not hot and doesn't burn. It's called Eish HaYisodi. And then there's the Koyach, there's the Koyach Yuli, what's the expression? There's the Koyach Yuli, and then there's the Eish Yuli. You saw the Eish Yuli, and then there's the Yisod HaYuli. The Yisod that's a potential for all four states that's beyond fire, wind, water, and earth. So essentially, it's explained in this way that there are states that first start out in an archetypal form, then they begin to take on shape and potential, and then they become an actualization of whatever that entity is. So Chassidus uses it now, after the Mittler Rebbe, quite often to explain that type of state that's not quite actualized yet, but it's also no longer just in a purely in its source. So it's nafel mimkede. Something has arrived. A package has arrived in the form of a flash, but it's not yet understandable. So essentially, it's potentially understandable. So it's called what he calls here a koyach hiyuli. It's the state of a koyach hiyuli. Uhu hanikra, and this is what is called barak hamavrik. A flash of lightning. Barak is a flash. Hamavrik, a flash of lightning. So when you think about it, it's a flash. It's a spark. When you look at a flash of lightning, it comes and goes so quickly. You can't hold on. You can't bottle it. Its initial state is a flash. The truth is, we probably have, not probably, for sure, we have hamsas and haskalas that we conceive of, thousands probably a day. Most of them disappear before we even are aware. But there are those that do last and they do remain, that spark is there. It has the potential to develop into Binah, but it's not Binah yet. So it's still in a state of this hiyuli, what now he called like a flash of lightning. Barak hamavrik. And what is it in Kabbalistic terms? Chochmah is Abba. This is the level of Yisod Abba. V'hu b'chinas Yisod Abba. So Chochmah has Chochmah sheba Chochmah, Binah sheba Chochmah, Das sheba Chochmah, Chesed sheba Chochmah. Yisod Abba, Yisod really means foundational or bonding. It's Abba Chochmah, where it's the Chochmah, it's still in Chochmah, but it has something that has some substance to it. That's what he calls this level of Barak HaMavrik. Okay. So that's stage number one when a new concept comes our way. Vihine, and now. B'ma'at rega, within literally a second, in a short moment, yuchel hasber zeis haskola luzulose. So if you froze that moment, as I said, that moment, it's still above explanation, even to yourself. You just had the flash of idea. But in a short moment, in a short second, he could explain it to this idea, this flash of idea, to another. Like you ever see at a meeting, people are talking about a subject, and someone suddenly says, I think I got it, right? So if you stopped right there when he's I got it, if you stop there, it's still something happened, the flash, but it's not yet explainable. And sometimes he'll say, give me a second, and he'll compose himself. And then a moment later comes next step where he could explain it. With an expansion of a number of riboy dvarim, many words, or many items, many words with a pretty wide expansion, a great expansion. The nikra, what is this called? The first level was called barak hamavrik, the lightning flash. This is called b'chinas hasbara. Unikra b'chinas hasbara hazeh. I'm sorry. This explanation is called b'shem binah kaneda. This is now called binah. V'hu b'chinas yesh shenitvas b'kelim b'tzirufa esius. This has now body. Yesh meaning it has substance. But not like just the substance of just a flash. The Yesod Abba. But this has now yesh, shenitfas, it manifests and contained b'kelim v'tziruf esis, in containers and in different permutation of letters, because you're explaining it. It's not just a yud, the dot of a yud. It's expanding now into ideas, explanations, and words, and letters and words. However, compared to this, the spark of the idea, the flash of the idea, which was Chochmah, is Ayin. Remember, I mentioned Ayin and Yesh. Why? Because Ayin means no substance. It doesn't have anything that you can hold on to in its pure form. Okay. Now he's going to say, because he still didn't explain Havein b'Chochmah. He just explained two levels here. So now he's going to say, now we must say, Shagam b'chinas hahesber, that also the level of explanation, Bina, hayakol kule, is completely encompassed. V'nimtze ba'avrokas v'skiras hasechel, and can be found, and is found within the flash, and skira is that glance, that one glance, that one flash, that one glance picture of seichel as it was in Chochmah, which means the matters that you're using to explain this idea and understand it. They were encompassed in that spark of Chochmah. That was the initial step of that flash. The gam koyach habina, and also the power of bina. Liyas haskola bo b'bchinas hasoga, which is how the idea comes into a form of understanding. Nimtza kol b'nekudas hachochma. So clearly he's speaking about two things, but bottom line is, even the little explanation, all is encompassed in that original spark, and also Bina, which really develops it, is all included in this Nukuda, in the point, in the concentrated spark of Chochmah. And I'll just read one more line, and then I'll stop for questions, and we'll stop here. And he says, in the Asius of Yud Kei Vav Kei, this is the level, he kates hatachten di Yud, so Yud Kei Vav Kei, generally the Yud is Chochmah, Hey, Yud is a spark, a dot. Hey is expanded, that's Bina. The Vav is Zah Midas, like a Vav Mamshich, it extends downward, and the final Hey is Malchus, the recipient. We're not talking about Vav Kei now, Yud Kei. So in the Yud, it's not just a dot. When you look how a Yud is made written in the Sefer Torah, the Yud has a center, has a Ketza Elyon, has that top spitzel, what's it called? That top like little crown, and it has a Ketza Tachten, like a drop goes down. So in the context of what we're talking about, Chochmah is the Yud, the Ketza Tachten, that little drop that goes below the Yud, below the black space in the center, that's the Binah Shebechachma. Because it's still Chochmah, but Chochmah now is having some little extension. It's not just pure dot. That's how it's explained. The Ketza Elyon is usually Chochmah Shebekeser or Keser Shebechochmah rather. How Chochmah is connecting to what's above it. So Chochmah is the Nekuda, and the little drop after Chochmah, the Ketza Tachten, the bottom point, if you wish, is Binah Shebechochmah. Okay, but he still has to explain how it's still concealed, and that's Havem B'Chochmah, not yet Chochmah B'Binah. So I'm going to stop here, right? Literally at the bottom of page 1198, one word on page 1199. The floor is yours. If anybody wants to comment, questions, anything.
Yeah, Yesod Shebechachma. Lahara, that's the bottom of Chachma closest to Bina. And it seems called here Havrakas, the Barak Havraka. There's a couple from Kesser. Why is Yesod, which is so low in the parts of it?
First of all, where do you see that Yesod Chachma is connected to Bina?
It doesn't. It doesn't say that, but it does say that the bottom of the kite, the bottom of the thing of Chochmah is how it connects to Bina. And that leaves the whole top part, that leaves all the other, the Chochmah, Shebechachmah, Bin Shebechachmah, Das Shebechachmah, etc., as being preceding Havraka. Is that correct?
Havraka, the Barak HaMavrik, what he calls Yesod Abba, is because there's something, Yesod Abba is in Chochmah, the element in Chochmah that gives it some body. However, it's not body that's expanded, it's just enough that you're conscious of the idea. This isn't about higher and lower. Every sphere in Chochmah has a different role to play. The Binah of Chochmah is higher than Yesod Chochmah. Binah is always higher than Yesod. But Yesod Chochmah has the element of giving Chochmah a certain body, which is the Barak HaMavrik. So it's not talking here about whether Binah is higher or lower than Yesod. Binah of Chochmah is how Chochmah has the potential to be explained. So that's what I'm aware of. It could be in some Maimorim that I need to look up. He may discuss it more in detail. How Binah Shebechachmah and Yesod Shebechachmah, their hierarchy. But my understanding right now is that just different elements in Chochmah without going into a hierarchy, which is higher, which is lower.
Okay.
Rabbi Jacobson, earlier it said that there was a distinction made between hiskalus and hislapshus, right? Between Chochmah and thing. Is that intentionally meaning that there's two different kinds of inner inclusiveness between the Chochmah and Binah B'Chochmah?
It could be that we'll learn about it once he explains what Chochmah and Binah is. I pointed it out that it says clearly that Binah Haven is Iskalus and Chochmah, and Chochmah is Islapshus and Binah. Right. I don't want to speculate. I'd rather wait till he finishes explaining it, and maybe it'll be understood. But you could probably come up with ideas, because you can't say Islapshus, Binah, and Chochmah. You could say Islapshus, Chochmah, and Binah. So there, the word Islapshus would consist of there's an entity, and Chochmah is enclothing itself in it. In Chochmah, Binah is not mislabish in Chochmah. Binah is just encompassed in Chochmah, the potential for understanding it. That's the basic understanding of it. But I think the Islapshus is because Chochmah actually will impact Binah in a critical way, which we'll learn about next page.
And then when it says, the last line, that it's the she'in yonim shebehem masber, it's a haskalo. Shlomer shegam bechinas hahesber haya kolo kulo, but ninsu bahavrachas eskira sekel kulo. What I would think that while there is obviously Binah within the flash, of the thought, that it would not necessarily be that all of that understanding is going to be within that flash of Chochmah.
Well, here too, I would wait till he finishes the subject, because I'm not sure what he's going to say the next page, and then we can discuss that. Because I'm not.
Okay.
I want to see how he explains this being within Chochmah. Maybe it'll help us understand the Kool-Aid. If it doesn't, I'll answer then, if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you.
The second to the last line, V'gam Kochach HaBinah.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. What is he adding there?
So I explained. I pointed out that clearly there's a step before the Binah is a full explanation of the Chochmah. But even before that, the second, right after the moment after the flash, he could begin to explain it. So it looks like there's two stages in explaining. First, like explaining what the idea I came to, what idea flashed inside of me, explaining that a bit, which is still not really Binah in the full sense. And then there's full development in Binah. It seems, and he's saying both are included in Chochmah.
Is it fair to say that if we take a step back from what we're learning here, or two steps back even, that what he's explaining here is essentially how there is a revelation of godliness within the mind, and how it unravels, so to speak, that the process, sort of almost like a Seder Yistalshalus of godliness, what is Re'iyah, and there's a divine revelation within your mind, and how does it unfold? And that's essentially what he's taking apart here piece by piece. Is that a fair abstract summary of what we're trying to get at here?
Ultimately, yes. Absolutely, yes. We're not there yet, because now he's still, remember, we're in the middle of a moshel. That's why it's important to know we're in the middle of the moshel now, the analogy. But once he gets back to the moral of the analogy, he's going to first speak about our way of understanding. But ultimately, remember, all this is, he said, is bonus and yichudi law. So this is about understanding the divine. But that is correct. As a matter of fact, when I did explain this at length, Chochma and Binah, and I said it yesterday a little more briefly, I said, most of us look at intelligence, that we're intelligent people, and we have an understanding of ideas and facts and data, and we come to conclusions, and we have different resonating truths and so on. In truth, it works the other way around. Elikus is beyond Seichel altogether. God created Seichel because he wanted to have a way for there to be a bridge between the divine and the human being who's created in the image of the divine, and he gave us a mind. He both created the mind, created intelligence, for us to have a ladder, a bridge to which connected to the divine. So in truth, all of Seichel is really just a lakus manifesting in ways that we can understand and contain. So that's why it makes total sense. It all begins in superconscious states that are beyond Seichel altogether. Then there comes Chochmah Stima, we learned superconsciousness, and a second level of superconsciousness, one that's beyond us altogether, one that's closer to us, and then comes consciousness. So essentially, human consciousness is really a spark, a little detail coming from a collective, infinite level of superconsciousness, which comes from even higher levels of super consciousness, all the way to levels that are beyond Chochmah altogether, and they are being channeled. So ultimately, the reason we have a mind is for us to connect to God. If we were only a body of emotions, our subjectivity and our impulses would take control. We'd only have an animal soul, which resides in the heart and the emotions. The Nefesh Elikis resides, as the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 9 in Tanya, in the mind. In the reflective mind is meant to be an objective arbiter that doesn't allow us to be trapped by the temptations and seductions of our heart, so we can reflect. But the true goal is not just to reflect and self-control, but also to find a more objective picture and a higher reality than just our own self-absorption and self-interest and self-survival. So the mind allows us to get out of the self, the yesh, to get into ayin. In the mind itself, Chochmah is higher than Binah in that sense. It's ayin. It's the channel and bridge into the levels that are higher than Chochmah. Binah is drawing it into within ourselves. So absolutely, all of this is coming to ultimately explain that.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much.
Just to go back to my question, what would be the quality of Yesod that would make it shaykh to Havraka?
It's not the shaykh of Avraka, I believe it's the substance. You need, like when you have an ingredient, you need sometimes glue to make it stick. The flash would disappear so quickly. Yesod Abba is called, Yesod means foundation. It's usually used in the word of iskashrus. The Alter Rebbe explains. So Yesod Abba is like the element that makes sure that it's like the wick to the flash, to hold on to it somewhat. That's my understanding of Yesod here.
Okay, all right.
But this is a subject that needs to be looked into. How Chassidus explains Yesod Abba elsewhere. I'm talking from memory now, from other Maimorim, but I believe that's what it is.
Now that we have that search tool that Rabbi Weingarten gave us, where would you suggest to look? Samach Veis?
Why don't you just type in Yesod Abba?
And it looks like you have to give it a safer. Samach Vav?
I would start with Sefer Lekutim of the Tzemach Tzedek always.
You're safer. Good. Okay, I'll check it out.
It's not mine. It's I worked on it, but it's Yesod. I would look there under Yesod Abba, Yesod Abba. First, I'd see what's said there, and then it'll usually refer you to other Maimorim.
The thing doesn't have all the memoriams. This website.
What's the website? What's the name of the website?
Chabad Library.
Oh, you can always do Google search in Hebrew. Google Hebrew. That'll give you everything.
Yeah, if you type Chabad after it, it's even more specific. Yeah.
Sefer Lekutim is your safest bet. It's the fastest way to get to where it's really explained. Because if you do these searches, it can just give you a reference to it, not necessarily will explain it. Okay, my friends, so let's stop here. Basically, end of page 1190.